Thanks for tuning in to Werme's Wisdom, where we talk old school UFC and MMA current events. I'm James Werme, UFC executive, announcer, and producer of over 40 events worldwide during the SEG and Zuffa years. Werme's Wisdom, here on the Todd Atkins MMA Podcast Network.
All right, so this is Todd Atkins, and I'm back with James Werme, who's one of everyone's from the feedback I've got. A lot of people, he's like one of the favorite guests of this show, and we're going to talk kind of about something that's in his wheelhouse, which is this UFC search for a new TV partner. And James, I just wanted to kind of give you you kind of introduce yourself in the intro, but maybe talk more about your background in TV before we discuss this.
Sure, and happy to be back, and thanks for having me, Todd. Always great to catch up with you about all things old school UFC and MMA current events. Yeah, so I mean, in my time, we were primarily a pay-per-view. We were distributed primarily in pay-per-view. So those were really the only partners that we had. But when Zuffa took over, we started to take meetings with networks. We were trying to get them to take the show on some sort of weekly basis, reality stuff. And we always had licensees, even in the SEG days, we had lots of foreign licensees, but that was more about, straight up deals for home video or pay TV or whatever it would be, sending tapes out. So, I have a lot of experience from those days. Now the game has so completely changed with all the platforms and all the opportunity. In some ways, it's endless opportunity, uh, but it can also constrain you a little bit because if I'm out here, here, and here, maybe my check over here is less. But a lot of the leagues are handling it in a different way. I think everyone envies these days. The NFL would probably be the gold standard of TV, at least domestically. I know the NBA is massive overseas, but you look at the NFL. And on a Sunday afternoon, they're on Fox and CBS, and then Sunday night they're on NBC, and then Monday night they're on ABC or ESPN rather, and then every once in a while they're showing up on Amazon. So, I mean, they got four big checks coming in, and that is certainly an awesome opportunity and reality to be living in. The UFC, in the last 5, 10, 15 years has positioned itself, maybe on par with those leagues just because of its domestic popularity and overseas reach, right? The UFC is huge everywhere in the world, which gives it a lot of leverage when it comes to deals like this. And that's why the numbers are as crazy as they are. But I guess if you're valued at X, you're going to be looking for a portion of X every year to broadcast your event. So maybe it's not so far off. So yeah, happy to lend whatever expertise or knowledge I can. And again, glad to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to ask a follow-up question, then maybe touch on WWE because you're with them too. But one thing I wonder is, I know you just mentioned when you're on multiple networks, you get four checks, but might it make it difficult for fans to find, you know, I want to find my programming and I gotta get this one and this one and this app and this app, and it's kind of,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
the more partners you have, the more coordination there is amongst partners, right? So, okay, we're dialed in with ESPN. We jump over here, and maybe things aren't as smooth as you'd like them to be. That's why the grass can be always greener, but sometimes the devil you know, right? So yeah, you're asking for a lot more work with regard to logistics and coordination and figuring out how the event will be not only produced but marketed, right? If you have a longtime partner, a single longtime partner, you know each other very well, you know the things that the event and the organization requires. You go to somewhere new, a whole new set of executives and creative, and maybe they have a different idea of how they want to portray your sport or market your sport. So those are conversations that come up the more partners you have. And like I said, it can go in any direction. In theory, if you got that far in the negotiations and you made a deal, then you should be on the same page. But that doesn't change the realities of, a liaison with A, B, C, and D rather than just A or A and B, So I don't want to say you can lose control because when you're in a position that the UFC is at this point, I'm going to assume that they have as much control as they want. But it's a lot of balls in the air and it's a lot of, marketing, publicity, all that stuff. You want it to be perfectly tailored to your event. When you've been working with a certain broadcast partner for a long time, obviously you know how to handle, or they know how to handle things. So yeah, there's an unknown, there's an X factor that I think exists when you branch out. But the flip side of that is you're reaching everyone everywhere. And if you can't see me here, you can see me there. And if you missed me here, you can see it here. And as well, and we see this now. We didn't see this in the old days, but the cross promotion, right? There was a time when if the same show or let's say football for example, NBC wouldn't necessarily publicize the games that were going to be on CBS or Fox or NBC or ABC or Monday Night Football, whatever. They wouldn't necessarily promote that, but I think now they do. If you watch the NBA playoffs, they always tell you what games are on ESPN or ABC or TNT. So I think multiple partners, obviously multiple checks, but the opportunity for multiple cross promotion within that platform, getting the eyeballs of that platform. Uh, you know, NBA Finals, they're getting the TNT eyeballs, they're getting the ABC eyeballs, they're getting the ESPN eyeballs, and the same with the NFL. They're really reaching everyone domestically on your dial. So, there's something to be said for that as well.
I'm talking about from the fan standpoint, though, where now the fans have, you have one streaming service, now you got to buy four or five.
Oh, well, and that's crazy because ESPN is talking about $30 a month, right?
Right.
Coming up soon. So, gone are the days of, Hulu at 6.99 and Netflix at 9.99. And it feels like these companies think that they can just raise prices and people won't notice. And that may or may not be true. I don't know the numbers on that, but streaming is starting to get a little bit excessive and to force people into a decision, right? So if I'm buying all the pay-per-views, do I need ESPN Plus at $30 a month? If that's where all my UFC programming is going to be. And I'll tell you what, if I'm Dana, I don't want all my programming, behind a paywall. Part of being with a network like ESPN is the ability to reach everyone everywhere. So putting up a paywall, unless you're providing something premium, it could be detrimental to the brand.
But that is what they're doing. You have to have ESPN Plus to be
Or
able
you
to watch UFC events and buy the pay-per-view. If you don't have ESPN Plus, you can't buy it.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a layman these days, so
Yeah.
I just see the programming that runs on ESPN. So I see that, and I'm pleased with that.
Yeah, you have to have a price for ESPN Plus
Okay,
just so you can have the opportunity to purchase
okay.
something else, the pay-per-view.
Oh, you got to have ESPN Plus to buy the pay-per-views?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
And
that's
that's what
kind
I'm
of
saying.
that's kind
MMA
of a kick in the
fans,
balls.
I don't think are big spenders necessarily. And to have to buy five different streaming services because they want to watch everything. We
Sure.
don't, we don't, but I think the newer ones are like we used to be. When I was young, I watched everything. I traded for the other events, you know, World Extreme Fighting,
Uh-huh.
Shuto, Pancrase. I was
Look at
trading
look at
tapes
you,
to
old
watch
school
all those.
baby.
Yeah. So I think newer fans, that's the way they want to watch every UFC event. And if they got to pay for four services, it's going to drive them crazy, I think.
I mean, I would say that's too much, and I think that paying for the plus just to get the opportunity to watch a
Right.
pay-per-views is a bit of a that's kind of ballsy. I mean, that's a lot to ask. I mean, especially when you're trying to hold on to your older viewers and gain newer ones, and presumably those newer viewers are going to be younger and don't have the discretionary income available, or have to go ask mom and dad um, every month or whatever it is. So, yeah, I don't know the logic behind that.
But that's what they've been doing.
Especially when pay-per-views are, what is an average
80.
UFC cost? $80 plus you got to pay monthly.
Hmm.
I mean, that that seems like a lot and seems like it would put people to a decision. And I don't know, they must have run the numbers, but yeah, I don't know. That seems a little excessive to me. And you know me, I'm a company guy, so I support the UFC in pretty much everything it does. But when I started, I think we were, oh, I don't know if we were still 14 or 19.99, maybe 24. I don't know. It was not expensive.
I
We were
think
just
what
we just wanted the eyeballs.
I think what fans would prefer is they might be even willing to pay an elevated price, but then not have to buy the pay-per-views. They're just
Mm,
all on that platform.
right. But then again, right, but how do you sell premium stuff? How do you charge more? How do you differentiate? Like to me, if we want to jump into it, to me, ESPN has always seemed like the ideal partner, while still doing big pay-per-views, and that allows you to have that differentiation, right? So cable ESPN is whatever your cable system is charging, and then if you have the premium service, I don't know what extra that gets you, and then if you have the pay-per-view, obviously, in theory, that's a big card, big location, or a big arena, or a big something. That's the other thing is if you're going to be on multiple platforms, especially if you're charging for the multiple platforms, you've got to differentiate somehow, right? So we're back to the NFL. Sunday afternoon is classic, right? You get your AFC, your NFC, and now NBC has branded that Sunday night game as, football night in America. Okay, great. And then Monday night has always branded itself as something special. And they have Thursday night as well, which is something special. So for every different platform, they have a perception of special. So I wonder how the UFC is accomplishing that, will accomplish that, as they look to new frontiers, in the TV deal.
Let me ask you about this. I think a lot of fans might like to see it go to Netflix. Now, I want to hear your pro or con of that.
Well, why do
The
you think a
Tyson
lot?
Paul fight did astronomical numbers.
Right,
As
right.
far as people
So
watching it, you could get it in front of a lot of people if they didn't have to shell out more money on top of Netflix to see it.
right, and that was fantastic. And that was a fight that I watched that I would not have normally watched if I had to pay any extra for it. And there is value to that. The deal was for like a billion a year for 5 years, something like that. They signed it in, whenever. Um, so these are substantial numbers we're talking about. I don't know what necessarily Netflix gets out of it. I don't know how many people that want Netflix don't already have it, or I never got the numbers, on what or how the Paul Tyson event increased their subscriptions. Obviously, it increased their profile. Do you have any insight on that?
I don't, as far as subscriptions go, but I feel like Netflix would be in a position of power, which is something UFC really doesn't like. I
Well,
feel like Netflix could say, look, your pay per views aren't doing as well. We're not going to pay $1 billion a year for you.
well, that's probably how the
We'll pay you a good
conversation
number, but it's not going to be $1 billion.
that's probably how the conversation starts. I don't know if that's how it ends, because if they're willing to shell out billions for the WWE, then that means that they're not afraid to play in that neighborhood. So, I don't know how numbers compare WWE, UFC, and, obviously it's not exactly the same market, but there's a fair amount of overlap, that's for sure. It's very similar demographic. So they go hand in hand, which is why they're together under TKO, and which is why it would make perfect sense for them to be together under Netflix. And wow, what a promotional opportunity, for not only Netflix, but the WWE and the UFC to all be, in the same home, with the opportunities for cross promotion and simultaneous or back-to-back events and things like that. So, I mean, that would really enhance the credibility of a Netflix. And like I said, if they're already paying billions for another sports entertainment property, then, it's probably going to end up there.
Well, it seems like I know, and I sent you another article where UFC was saying ESPN was still very much in play. Why do you think they wouldn't do Netflix if they don't?
Why wouldn't they do Netflix? Well, if the money wasn't right, if the partnership didn't feel right, if, and I can't see this happening, but if say Netflix as the network wanted to be involved in a certain amount of programming or matchmaking or anything that would pull decision making away from Dana and the UFC, right? The UFC's been going for 30 years. They know how to make it hum. And so they, I would assume, do not want any more cooks in their kitchen. So certainly the money, certainly the partnership, the marketing, the publicity, all the things that come with the partnership, that could steamroll a deal. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, especially if you're looking for cachet or hook, and I don't know what that is, but that could be a way to differentiate. I think you have to differentiate in some way. Although, you're not necessarily asking for more money.
Hmm. Now, let me ask about this. I know you mentioned a little bit, but maybe talk. So we talk about Netflix, talk about staying with ESPN. Let's talk about if they're on multiple. How does UFC benefit from being on multiple platforms?
Well, like we talked about before, multiple checks, multiple platforms is multiple markets and multiple eyeballs and multiple ways of reach. On this network, you're getting these people. This network, you're getting these people. Add to that sponsorship opportunities and all of that, right? So revenue sources, you would think if you broke it up and you got a bunch of different deals, well, I would think that the overall number would be bigger, but the workload is harder, and having more partners is potentially more of a pain in the ass and more hassle. Um, you know,
The
it's
James Wormy hassle factor.
the hassle factor,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
It's significant, especially when you haven't had to worry about certain things for a long time. And the UFC had a good relationship with Spike, and then they had a good relationship with Fox, and it seems like they have a good relationship with ESPN. So yeah, I mean, multiple platforms is a great way to try to reach as many people as possible. But that said, these days, especially with the internet and streaming and all that stuff, I think anyone that wants to find it will find can find it. Um, but yeah, that's my take. And listen, they're going to say it's not about money, but it is. It is about money because there's shareholders involved, and they're looking for share price to increase. That's their only concern. Gone are the days of we're in it for the good of the sport and the extension of the brand. I mean, they still want to extend the brand, but the UFC is a worldwide animal. At this point, world domination is pretty much accomplished. So how are we gonna milk this for all it's worth and still provide the fans with a quality product that people want to see?
Yeah, and that's something I think we didn't get into as far as what I was sending you, but I do think there's more complaint amongst opinion that people like YouTubers or even people who cover the sport, like journalists, that the product's more watered down. There's less cards they want to watch actually because there's just so many of them.
Yeah. And I think that's a reality anytime you expand the number of events and therefore the number of fights like the UFC has. Add to that the athletes are so much better and more trained up, and everyone is a mixed martial artist. So again, anything can happen in the octagon, and nothing is more exciting than when two guys go in and let it all hang out. But when you've got a ton of events, so you're choosing from a much larger pool of athletes, and those athletes are trained up and they have the basic skills and they know really defense, right? That's kind of the difference between the old days and now is being able to defend against your weakness. So I can see how that would be an issue. And I don't know the answer to that because less shows is not on the table, I'm sure. You hope that in the growth of the sport and the popularity of the sport, more people get into it at a younger age and train and find ways to compete in competitions, whether that's amateur or professional on a lower level. But yeah, that's a reality to having this many events is the potential is there for the quality of the athlete, the quality of the fighter to be less.
Yeah. How do you combat that though? Like if you're, is it not possible when you're expand the when it's so big already?
It's hard. It's very hard because, like I said, when the talent pool is now it's needed to be so big, right? It's so big because it's needed to be so big. So guys that would not have been on the show 5 years ago are on the show. So you're getting, at the same time, you're getting a lesser athlete, I guess, a lesser fighter. That same fighter is a mixed martial artist. So they're trained in everything, presumably, that can happen in the octagon. So I think the combination of those things makes it tough for for everything to be exciting. I don't have an answer for that, except that you hope that stars emerge, right? You hope that people seize their opportunity to be fighting on the big stage and they fight their ass off and they knock somebody into next week or they submit them with great ground technique or whatever it is. They separate themselves as stars. But as far as the general pool, I don't know. That's fighter development and that's development of the sport beyond the UFC, right? That has to start when they're kids. That has to start when they're teenagers, or whenever kids get into sports, they go in that direction. So I don't really have an answer for that, and I recognize it as a challenge.
Yeah. Now,
What do you think?
uh, well, I was talking to you about this a little bit offline earlier, where I feel like we were talking about PFL, for example, letting go of a lot of these more pricey Bellator fighters that were champions or guys who had a push from Bellator. And I always have the feeling that, like you said, the UFC's been around forever. People have always said, "Oh, losing this guy's going to be detrimental, losing that guy," and it never really is. Even losing Conor McGregor, they're still going. They didn't
Yeah,
go out of business because Conor's not fighting. I feel like it's just guys will come along as the competition is there. You know.
yeah, yeah.
Now, will they be as big as some of the other guys? Maybe not. But there will be people emerge, and the product is, in the UFC's case, the UFC is the star of the show, and Dana White.
No
So
question. Yeah, you know how I feel about that. We always led with the event, and as much as you love to have stars, and you're in the business of creating stars, the UFC's airwaves, baby. It's our show. And or ended up in demise, but from the numbers that it sounds like they were saying they were paying people, that's a recipe for disaster without any type of back end deal, back end guaranteed money from that night or afterwards, or rebroadcasts or overseas licensees and pay-per-view or whatever it is. You cannot get yourself into that type of situation unless you know the return is going to be there.
right, and that's what I was talking about with PFL. But any event, like I feel like you could kind of build your own people from your pool and whoever else you want to bring into your pool, because the
Yeah,
competition will make that happen, especially in a tournament format like we're talking.
who he beat and how he looked. And oh, I know he's got to fight this guy next. So now there's a story. And now I'm interested. And now I'm curious. And now I want to tune in. So that is certainly a viable way to build stars and build interest and keep talent fees down, you know.
That and also I think less hassle factor, like you're saying, where I don't want to fight this guy. You're in a bracket.
Yeah,
You've already agreed to be in this bracket. You're gonna fight. Who's
yeah,
next?
yeah. Well, I don't want to fight that guy. You know how I feel about that too. This is pro sports and
It
it's a
seems to
prize
be
fight.
getting a bigger thing with the UFC. I don't know what happened with the contracts, but it seems like more and more fighters are saying, "I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that," and
Well,
I'm like, "What happened here?"
big dogs like to bark loud, and if someone feels like they're a big dog, they're gonna bark loud, and they're gonna probably try. They're not that at all. I mean, if you want to be a champion, if you're a competitor, if you're a prize fighter, that shouldn't even be an issue.
Yeah, it does seem to be more of an issue with the UFC these days. I don't know if they gave fighters more power or what, but it seems like it's getting harder and harder for them to make the fights they want to make because guys are just make it difficult.
Well,
And
that
that's another
sucks.
reason why I like the tournament. This is a bracket, you're in it. We don't need to match make. The
Yeah.
matches are there.
Yeah. No, listen, you're talking to an old school UFC guy. I love tournaments. We used to do them in one night. I'm
Right.
sure these guys are doing them spread out over several events and
It's
months.
still not a long time. Even that too. Like guys are in the UFC are whining about, oh,
Well, yeah, media and sponsorships is bigger, so perhaps they don't want to risk tarnishing their record or their image, which is, to me, that's not cool. It's not
right,
sporting. For the reasons that you want to compete and be a champion. But who knows why everyone's in it or why they're hanging around in it? Who knows motivation, right? But if they don't want to fight every 5 months, that tells me they're making too much money.
right. Now let's kind of pivot to the GFL. I know we were going to talk a little bit about this, and we remember some old stories of other events. Maybe I can refresh your memory on some. But we talked about GFL. This guy was saying he was going to pay big money to all these old stars that really aren't even fighting anymore, most of them, and no event ever happened. You know, and it doesn't look like any event is going to happen.
Did they
Um,
give a reason?
well, they're saying their money back or backed out at the last minute or something like that.
When he actually looked at the books.
Probably so, but
Um,
maybe talk about that as you've been part of an event, and
yeah,
you
I
have an
mean,
upstart event. Why would it kind of reminds me of Affliction? They were paying a lot, and already had a successful clothing brand, but
well, the UFC makes it look easy,
right.
but they're the only ones doing it on the level they're doing it, the way they're doing it, with the success that they're doing it. That show is 30 years old, and they've done 300 plus shows. So
Oh, probably way
any,
more than that when you throw in
yeah,
all
I
these
mean,
Apex shows and fight
yeah. So
nights. God
anyone
knows
that
how many they've done.
anyone that thinks they can jump in and get into the big time right off the bat is fooling themselves and is kidding themselves and hasn't and either doesn't know what they're getting into or hasn't analyzed the situation properly. This is a major undertaking. Put on a TV show is no easy feat, and paying fighters a lot of money might sound great in a press release and get you a bunch of names uh, that you want as an organization, but it guarantees you nothing. It guarantees you zero revenue on the night of the
That
show.
is the only guarantee.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
only yeah, the only guarantee is you're gonna have to pay them what you say you're gonna pay them. But if you're an upstart organization and you don't have a TV deal or you don't have a pay-per-view deal or you have no way to generate revenue by streaming or on the web, then you're stuck with the gate, right? You're stuck with the house on that night. So, again, if you're an upstart organization, how many people are you going to do in that arena? I don't know. What is it? Two, three, five, seven, 10, whatever it is. It's probably not going to cover the purse for the 14, 16, 18 fighters you need to pay. Um, and if only half of them are top level talent, you're still talking about, I don't know, hundreds of $1,000s, millions of dollars. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I know that my general statement would be that you got to know what you're getting into. You got to know that you're not going to be anything like the UFC, and you've got to base your financials on what's real, not what you think you can do, or not for the deal you hope you're going to get, or the streaming platform where you hope you can get these eyeballs. Nothing is guaranteed, and this is not easy to do. So, yeah, I don't. Again, I've seen a million of these come and go. It's usually the same story. They come out like a house of fire. There's usually a big press conference. There's usually big numbers getting thrown around, big venues getting thrown around, big potential deals getting thrown around. And then a couple weeks before the fight, it's like, crickets. What happened here? And the guy left town, or the organization left town, or whatever it is. So it's not easy, and there's only one UFC.
Yeah. I know you brought, like I said, I talked about Affliction. I don't know how much you remember about them,
Yeah, I do. I do.
and kind of, how they
How
went
many
on.
shows did they do?
I don't recall. I want to say maybe it's less than five, was it?
I was
Or
going to say three. So,
yeah,
yeah.
but they had some big
Yeah,
names.
they had some big names and they had some real money. And again, I don't know how they found their demise, but my guess is the guy that was making a ton of dough on t-shirts started to realize that he was jeopardizing his successful business to run this other unsuccessful business. And maybe they get into it because of love of the game and take care of the fighters, and we're going to do it different. We're going to do it right, and we're going to be better, and we're going to be bigger. But reality is a different story, baby.
Yeah, and maybe talk about the one with Campbell doing Tito and
Oh, yeah. So exactly. And I thought about this, where Campbell has his Combate Global, which has
this is
been
Campbell McLaren for
Campbell,
everybody.
this is Campbell McLaren, former creative executive, executive producer for the UFC when I was hired. Campbell was there at the start. He actually received the project from Art Davie and Jorge Gracie and brought it to Bob Meyerowitz, and he was the liaison and he was the creative executive in charge of the UFC when it started. And Campbell stayed on as executive producer until about 96, I believe, and he was replaced. But Campbell, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, he's been doing it a long time, started up an organization catering to the Hispanic market called Combate Global. And they have an excellent deal on Univision. They have since moved off of Univision. Maybe they moved back off. But they, at one point, tried to dip their toe into the pay-per-view arena because that's everyone's goal, right? And they spent some money and they got Tito Ortiz to fight Alberto Del Rio. So you got Tito, huge MMA legend and name, UFC, versus Alberto Del Rio, who was a huge WWF guy. I think he was the champion at one point. So these are two marketable guys you would think could draw a certain amount of attention, publicity, eyeballs. And the pay-per-view was a dud. I mean, it hurt them, and they have not done one since. So even the organizations that are on TV and have a following and are doing successful shows on a recurring basis, and you can count on them to have top talent and do recurring shows and quality production and good broadcasts. They had a great studio set up at Univision. Even when they tried pay-per-view, they failed miserably. So it's not an easy game.
Let me
Excuse me.
ask you this: when you'd have an event like Combate or even PFL, which I think is bigger than Combate, like they've done a lot of events. What do you think it would take for one to rise up to even close to the UFC?
Well, you've either got to have you've either got to have a show that everyone wants to see for whatever reason, or a fighter that everyone wants to see. How do you break through? How do you transcend? You know, that can take a long time. It took the UFC, 15 years to do that. So, and how do we do that? We stuck it out. We stuck it out through the hard times. We built stars. We scratched and clawed. Zuffa was able to secure the Ultimate Fighter, which got it in front of a lot more eyeballs. So you've got to have a product that's worthy of the fans' attention. You've got to be able to get it to them on a consistent basis, right? People have to know and therefore look forward to when the next show is. And you also have to build story, and that has to do with your fighters and your athletes and hopefully your stars. So that's how you do it. And usually it takes a very, very long time. You know, Pride was able to do it pretty quickly. If you think about an organization that came out of nowhere and was able to put themselves on the upper echelon pretty quickly, Pride comes to mind immediately. But Pride was grabbing UFC legends, Pride was grabbing K1 legends, so
And
and
pro wrestlers
and pro wrestlers.
from
So
Japan, yeah.
and their events were over the top entertaining, right? You went to those shows with fireworks and music and lasers and screens and just the production and bringing out the guys, like monuments at the beginning of the event. So, Pride was able to do it because they had an organization, a show that everyone wanted to see because, buzz was hot for that because it was a hot show. They had fighters that everybody knew and everyone wanted to see, so they had the star factors. And through their relationships, shall we say, they were able to secure good television right out of the gate. So yeah, only Pride comes to mind, and that was in Japan, which is a totally different market. So here, uh, I think it takes quite a bit more and much, your pocket's got to be very, very deep and your connections have to be very strong. And the product you're putting out has to be extremely entertaining to where people are saying, oh, you got to check this out. And you have to be building stars at the same time. So they're also saying, oh, and this fighter is kick ass. You got to see this man or this woman because they're awesome. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. But you
It's
think if
hard.
you were doing a show, I know
I told you
there's some things
about.
you've been thinking about, but would you do like I said, where you would you try to build from within rather than bringing in the UFC veterans?
Yeah, because I don't
Because I'm
have.
not crazy about it. I would rather just I have my group of people.
Yeah.
Let's see what
Yeah.
happens.
If if I was going to start an organization, not having deep pockets myself and not having any best friends that are, millionaire, billionaire types, if I was going to try to build something from scratch, I would be realistic about it. And I would first start with the only goal in mind was to make it a viable live event. And what I mean by that is the gate has to cover the expenses of the show, right? Just looking at those two numbers, the expenses to do a show, the person, the production, and everything that goes with it, of course, and the gate, what's my return? And if those numbers didn't make sense, I would stop right there. But if they did make sense, I would continue. And I would hopefully be able to establish it as a viable live event. Now, that would probably involve the geographic touring, right? Where you're staying in the same home buildings in a relatively small area so that you can bubble up geographic interest and hopefully probably use fighters from that area as well. So you're always pulling from the locals. You're always promoting hometown guys or girls. So that is how I would do it. I would look, and this is ass backwards from what everyone else wants to do and fails, but I would look at television partners as something that's secondary. I would work to build to that. Everyone wants a great broadcast partner, but TV rights usually don't pay very much. It's more about marketing and publicity. So you build the show as a live event on a regional basis. You hook in some television. Again, same thing on a regional basis. You hope that through social media, through the web, you're able to spread it in that way, right? So you don't try to lean on your broadcast partner or your potential pay-per-view, which we haven't gotten to, but you try to build it grassroots and you try to build it from a logical, reasonable standpoint. I think what ends up happening with most of these organizations is they have grandiose ideas and they think they can pull it off. And then once they start to get into the minutia of it, they realize that it's just not viable. I told you about the story when Fabiano Iha called me after I got fired from the UFC. Iha called me because he had some friends, boxing money, Don King money. They wanted to get into MMA. They wanted to do XYZ, big, bigger, biggest, and they brought me out to, hear their pitch and make them a budget. And before I even got into the numbers with them, I said, guys, are you ready to lose millions of dollars? And they said, no. And I said, well, then this is the wrong business for you, man. And that they would never heard from again, and I never heard from them again. And that's a perfect example of grandiose ideas overshadowing the reality of the situation. It's
Yeah,
not that easy.
you have to lose before you can even turn it around.
Well, if you're going to try to go big right out of the gate, right? If you're going to try to present yourself as a big deal and even more potentially damaging, sign big purse talent. You're sinking yourself right out of the gate. And unless you've locked in those broadcast partners or pay-per-view deals or anything that's going to drive revenue that night or after that night, yeah, you're a startup. You know, think about the startups. How many millions did startups lose um, before they're able to turn a profit, if they ever do, right? Think of a new MMA organization trying to go big as like a startup in 2001. Yeah, everyone's all about it on Monday, but you know, the reality sets in by Friday.
Yeah, it's interesting to look because I'm kind of looking at the PFL and UFC because I see the PFL's trying to make moves. They've opened some different, that PFL Africa, that Middle East, MENA is what they call it, um, Europe, Australia. So they're kind of opening these different regions.
And what do those offices do? What do they do there?
Well, they're going to run their own,
Events.
tournaments.
Oh,
What I would like
that's,
to see, in my eyes, I don't know if they're going to do this. I would think they would. Is you're going to have tournaments in this region, this region, this region, this region, and then the people who win, representing all these different countries, will meet in one tournament to decide
I mean,
each weight class.
that sounds cool.
Yeah,
And it sounds like a way to try to, another thing that's important is to try to bite off of the UFC's success and the headway that the UFC has made everywhere, right? If I'm starting a new organization, I'm trying to go big and international, give me the top 5 countries of the UFC, and I'm going there to start up local promotions and try to bite off of the success of MMA in those areas. As well, if you have those types of international uh, offices or promotions or tournaments or fights, events happening, the cross promotion, right? We send a guy over here, we send a guy over there, or the champion from here can fight the champion from here. So you set up a lot of possibilities for interesting stories, right? And international stars. So I think that's a cool thing. I think that's a cool idea.
yeah. It's so that's kind of what I was thinking as far as like being a startup. Try to keep your costs low, but they're still expanding while trying to
Well, I
keep your
don't
costs
I don't
low.
know how low costs are if you're setting
Yeah,
up, multiple international offices, promotions, doing
right.
shows. Yeah, I don't know. That's certainly, if you have the money, that's certainly a good way to do it, is to try to bite off the UFC's popularity internationally is a good thing to do. Because, who knows how many other organizations are going on in Spain. I'm sure there's got to be a huge MMA thing happening in Spain right now because of Ilia. So, that's an opportunity. But yeah, I mean it's a tough gig. Tough gig. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into getting the UFC to hum like it does.
I think it's like Miguel said, like you said, are you prepared to lose money? But he also said the other way you can do it is to raise other people's money and lose that, rather than your own.
Yeah,
Those
it's
are
the
the two
same. It's the
ways you can
same.
try to do it.
Yeah, it's the same difference though. And sooner or later, whomever's money is getting lost is at some point probably going to assess the situation. Um, because it's a long game, right? Even if you come in with a bunch of dough and you come in with a great plan and you come in with, a great stable of fighters, these things don't happen overnight. You don't become an established brand in a sport overnight. I don't think so. I mean, it hasn't happened yet,
Right.
kind of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, James, it's always interesting. I'm always fascinated to hear you talk a lot like Miguel, just hearing your wisdom, as we titled the show, Wormy's Wisdom.
Yeah,
I
man,
think
and
so.
everyone should know Todd titled the show, and I'm flattered by the title of the show, and I hope I certainly have knowledge and insight wise at times, right? And I appreciate being here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's, one of the themes of my channels. I like to bring on people who can educate fans, and I think someone like yourself is in a position to do that
Yeah.
with your experiences.
What is the current state? So I know that the UFC is outside its exclusive
Right.
uh with ESPN. So they're free agents in theory, right?
In theory, I don't
and
know.
the deal is up at the end, and this, December 30 at the end of the year, right?
Mm.
And so that they need to pull the trigger on that. If they're going to leave ESPN, they need to pull the trigger like as soon as possible. If they're not, then it's something they can kind of delay.
That's
But look, pretty good chance it's sticking with ESPN.
that'll be something interesting to watch.
Yeah.
For people that are watching this, you can pay attention to that and see if
I
it
mean,
plays out as James says.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, because there's work to be done, and there's learning curves to be surfed, um, and there's everything to be put in place from promos, marketing, publicity, materials, schedules, graphics, everything, anything that goes into the broadcast and the presentation of the broadcast on that network. The UFC is humming, so they don't miss a beat. But those networks will have work to do, and it'll take them months to get ready for a major property like the UFC landing on their network.
now tell people where they can find you. People who might be interested in you, or maybe seeing you for the first time.
Yep, I'm on X at James A. Werme, JamesAWerme, and on Instagram, Werme James, WermeJames.
Is there anything you can talk about with the project that we have been discussing?
Yeah, sadly, no. With that project, and Todd's talking about the potential of me getting back in the fight game. I've been approached by a group here. I live in Puerto Rico, and a group has approached me to join a team to start a local promotion, which I think is a good idea, and I think could be successful if handled correctly. Um, but I'm kind of, I'm not leading that team. So, when they have all their ducks in a row, then it'll be time to get serious. And until that happens, I'm kind of, I have a day job I have to attend to. But no, an exciting potential. And like I said, I do think it could do well because Puerto Rico is a fight island, and they love MMA and they love boxing, and the team that has approached me is impressive. And I think we could establish it, like I said, as a viable live event, and then look to grow into the television space. We already know of some high level athletes that are willing to fight. So it's kind of a question of my partners or the people that have approached me to kind of line up all those ducks, and that'll be the time when we jump. But I'm kind of, like I said, not leading that project. I'm being taken along in that, so I'm going to react as it goes. I'm not pushing and I'm not stalling.
Well, as always, like I said, it's always great to talk to you. People check out James on his social medias and be on the lookout for more episodes featuring James Werme, Werme's Wisdom.
Thank you, Todd. Have a good night, my friend.
Oh, you too. Everybody, take care.
You know the guy that interviews young Dana in that classic UFC video? That was me. And I was also the executive running the show when the Fertittas bought it. Let's talk old school UFC and MMA current events on Wormy's Wisdom here on the Todd Atkins MMA Podcast Network.